Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video today we are going to be talking about how to take your color and textural experimentation and move into mood board making. So let's get started. So last time in the video about color and texture, you saw a sort of sped up part where I was playing with this grid and I was coloring on this page, and what I was writing on these pieces was numbers that correspond to markers, so that way I could match these colors later. And remember, I told you it's really important to know where your specific images are coming from or keeping track of things, because you will need to replicate throughout the sketchbook to keep the entire process cohesive. So that's what I was doing. If it didn't have a number, that was a color that I didn't think quite matched the story, and then I just didn't go with it. But there was no rhyme or reason for my choosing. I just went with it, and that's what I liked. So what I did after I selected color was I took the texture and the textural outlines that I made on the tracing paper that I kind of gathered from these images over here. And what I did is I took those cards that I used to show the color theory idea and took the ones that I thought best matched my idea overall and started mimicking the textures that I found. And so I did take the quadrant idea here and I used keys to create serrated edges, and at the bottom of the onion to create sort of this hairy like root structure on this side. And notice I kept this color scheme more complementary with blues and orange, and then I kept this one more analogous with the cool colors of green and blue. And so basically what you have at the end is a page that is just a representation of texture and color. This is not necessarily what you have to do. This is just showing that you used your original brainstorming images to come up with concepts that you could further explore later. So in this video, we're primarily going to focus on mood board making. And so first I want to point out that everybody makes mood boards differently. You might make them larger than a sketchbook. You may put them on like a cork board. Some of them have fabrics on them. Some of them have actual fashion on them. But basically the difference between a mood board and a collage, and this is something that I was taught, is that it's supposed to be what you could use to present your entire idea. And so the least referential you are to other fashion in your mood board, the better off it will be. And so in this, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to make a successful mood board. So unlike a collage, mood boards tell stories, and they're sort of everything that you're thinking about put together cohesively so you could give that information to someone else. The collage is literally just a group of images that are being pasted together that have absolutely no reason to them. They could, but a lot of times there's no overlap or interest. So you want to think about a mood board as an art piece of its own, and you're going to use that to branch off of to create your fashion designs. We primarily use mood boards in the industry to communicate an idea or to defend your concept. A lot of times, a lot of people will ask you where you came up with your idea, and you never want to not be able to answer that, because that could come across as you just looked on the internet and found something and you liked it and you copied it. So the idea is to be as original, and your mood board is sort of showing your work for that process. So in your mood board, the best thing to include are 5 things that I always put in them. And there's always the 6th one that I sometimes will use and sometimes I won't, and I'll show you what I mean. But first thing you want to do is go back to the reason why you're designing it, and you want to make sure that you're finding imagery of the customers that you're designing for. And in my case, it was these celebrities that I thought were the most prominent and people that would wear it. Now, what you don't want to do is find images like you have in your customer profile page where they're wearing clothing, because going into a mood board, you're portraying that story. And if you're telling them, being the audience, that they, you know, should be wearing this, or this is what you're going to be looking at, then they think that that's what the direction your designs are going to go in. So keep in mind when you're looking for your customer profile picture, to stick with images of them, of people at the neck up is what I always recommend. That way you're just showing the beauty of the styling or the hair or the eyes or whatever it is that you find that you would use if you were presenting this. So you also want to kind of go back to this page, and the second component of your mood board should include an image that represents one of the concepts that you thought were interesting from your original brainstorming. And it doesn't have to come from these necessarily, it could just come from your overall idea. But in this case, you would choose one, and basically don't use this image if you don't have to. So say I wanted to use keys, I wouldn't necessarily use these as my image because I already have it in my sketchbook. It's nice to replicate certain things, but you always want to try to find new ideas. So furthering that exploration by finding another picture is one of the best things you can do. And once you have that image or that idea and you found it, you also want to take the furthered idea, the explored idea that you used in this page, the textural and color page, and you want to use that component. So in this case, it was keys, and I explored the keys with these edges and this built up texture. So this is what I would use to put in the mood board, somehow grouping that together along with my customer. You also want to take more concise imagery of textures, and this could come from anything. It could come from, you know, animals, humans, fabrics, whatever you want that can voice that idea across the page without it being just your idea. So keys don't always come across as serrated edges to people, and this would, but this is mine, and so you want to find something that you can express this through, so you want to find something similar. And so you would get an image that matched your texture. Lastly, the fifth thing that I always recommend is to find something that represents the color concept. Don't necessarily have to use what you explored, you can, but you want to find something that works with your colors, an image that works with your colors, but also overall. So don't just find a picture of a dress that's, you know, orange and blue because that was your concept, but try to find an image of something that represents that. And one really good way to do that would be to look at your overall idea and try to find back to when you were in your customer profile page, something in here that you could work with. And so in this case, I looked specifically at the cities and tried to find colors that match the vibe of those cities. But it's up to you how you want to do it. You could also go with just the season and find colors that match that as well. And keep in mind the side notes that you made, so that way you're not making something that doesn't feel like the person you're designing it for. And the last and final tip, which is just an extra one, while you're making the mood board, it might be a good idea to include a little bit of hand gesture drawing or something more linear or creative that you're doing with your hand, and you can use whatever medium, but just to tie the rest of what you're doing together. So once you have those images, you can pretty much complete the mood board process using two different ways or techniques. One can be very physical, which is what I did in this case, where I'm actually cutting, printing, pasting, pinning, whatever it is. Or you can go digital and you can use software, or you can use like online collage websites, things like that. If you don't have a printer, you can always make it digitally and then find a way to print it later somewhere like public. But you do want to make sure that you get it in a sketchbook, whether it starts out big on a cork board, then you take a picture of it and then you put it in here. However you like to work. Some people don't like how small a sketchbook is. Just make sure that you're able to keep a record of it and put it in your sketchbook, so that if you are, you know, presenting, you have a flow to your process. So what I did whenever I was coming up with the concepts is I was thinking about those 5 things that I mentioned, and then how I would explore something else, like in terms of my hand drawing or gestures, and I just let it flow. And so you can see I took an idea of a customer and then a concept, that I took from my original brainstorming. I took my exploration, images of that texture, and applied it to the location and the mood, and then found imagery for the color. And I did that in threes. So some tips for making a mood board also would include making sure that you have a really good composition and meaningful composition on the page. You don't just want to compile it together and make them all side by side and everything is square, because what's going to end up happening is it's just going to look like a collage and it doesn't really give you a message about what you're going to do with this image. So a part of that composition is finding a focal point. Your focal point could be anything. If you want the mood board to be more expressive in color, you would kind of generate a mood board that was more colorful. But if you wanted it to be an image, you really need to find a way to put that idea and center an image or off-center the image, or do something with it compositionally, so that way people know what your ideas are. One way to do that would be to play on scale. So the bigger an item is on the page, the more prominent it's going to be to the person. So the hierarchy visually is that this item is more important, and that's what you're trying to say. If everything was the same size and ratio, proportion, it would look like you didn't really care what was more important. You were just going to use everything however you wanted to use it. But the biggest tip, I think, when you're making a mood board is you really want to work in groups of 3. And this is what I always do. This is not something everybody does, but it helps me think if I do it like this. And so when I say groups of 3, what I mean is you're going to take your ideas that you have. And so, you know, you have all of these concepts and you're going to break them down into 3 ideas. And from those ideas, what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a specific customer that you were thinking about. You're going to come up with the item that you're inspired by, the object you're inspired by, the concept, whatever it is in your brainstorming. And then you're going to include one color story, one textural idea, and then something to represent the location or the place that you imagine this person sort of living and working or whatever. And you do that for 3 of your people. And so for me, I took St. Vincent, Annie Clark, and I took FKA Twigs and Alexa Chung. And what I did is I assigned them a location. And so I gave St. Vincent, Seattle, I gave FKA Twigs, New York, and Alexa Chung, Chicago. And so that automatically sets the tone for who these different girls are and the commonalities amongst them. And then I assigned them, you know, one of my details. And so I gave St. Vincent the keys, and I gave Alexa Chung the onion and the muscles of the hand, and I gave FKA Twigs the fly. And so there was no really reason why I did that. I just kind of went with it, and that's what I thought would be good, and that kind of helped develop the mood board as I went along. So basically, once you have identified what you're going to do, you know, with these images or ideas or whatever it is, you've put them in order, and what you've done is now group them in a way where you could put all of that on one, or you can do what I've done, and that is split it into 3 mood boards. Now, the reason why I do this, the reason why I create 3 of them instead of just doing everything on one and making it very small and kind of unreadable, you can always scan these, crop them, and put them into PDFs. And that way, you know, there is a sort of connection with all of them. But one kind of thing that's going to keep them all together is the color and the textures pages that you are working with. So keep in mind, no matter how different they may look, they're all one idea that you're going to ultimately explore later through 2D experimentation. So just to give you an idea of kind of what that all means, here is the page that I'm talking about, and this is my mapping of the concepts. And so I chose a person, I chose a concept, I chose a texture, I chose a location, and then I chose a color. And this right here is all being held together by the color and textural aspect of the entire concept. Nothing should be independent. This shouldn't look like it goes one way and then something goes the other way. It should all feel connected. It's just I did 3 different ones because that's how I like to work. It helps me later whenever I'm working on creating fashion. So right off the bat, what you really want to do when you're looking for these images, like say you found this picture of her and this, you know, sort of high saturated forest or whatever that is, you want to make sure you're keeping record of these, copies of these. And so what I did is I went ahead for later, and this is something you would want to do at this point in the process. As you're taking these images, no matter what you do with them, these will be your key pieces, and identify when you're printing them off or saving them into your computer, which ones you'd like to actually use for silhouette. So think about what you'd want to do with your actual shape of the outfits you're going to create. And so you definitely want to include this, and you want to play with scale. So as you can see, I've printed off 2 larger ones, one in black and white, one in color, just in case I didn't like the colors with a certain look. And then you want to print off one that's a lot smaller. So, you know, if you're using a different proportion, it may look different on the model or the croquis. In this case, I've chosen to take this page, which you definitely want to work with, and I chose specific elements of my mood boards that I thought would be interesting to use. And a lot of times you're not really going to use the person or the backdrop of just the setting, the mood setting. You're really going to focus a lot on your key inspiration items or brainstorming items. And so you find these items and you pinpoint them out and you print them in different scales and color and grayscale and all these other things. So that later when you are experimenting, you already have them and you don't have to worry about going to find all of this, because this is sort of a part of the planning process for what is to come. So once you have all your images printed that you're going to use for the mood board, as you can see, I did a lot of different things, and what you want to consider is playing with line and hierarchy, scale, proportion, and sort of what is important on the page. And so with this one, and as they go along, you'll see less white space overall. And so with this one, what I've done is I filled the whole page up with line. And I think that that's important because the point here is not the key necessarily, but the sharp edges that are on the key. And when you look at the key, you understand that it's a key, but you don't necessarily understand why I like it. But what's going to tell you that I like about the key is the diagonals and the lines. So as you can see, what I did is I put these diagonal lines, these sharp serrated edges, and these came directly from a picture that I printed and then cut up and then drew on top of, and I'm framing the entire center because I don't necessarily want you to look just at her, which she'll draw you in, but I want these lines here that are going vertical to take you down to the key, which is a little bit off center. And so overall, you automatically look at this and say, okay, great, diagonals, zigzags, whatever, sharp edges, however you want to put it. And so you get the idea, and you get the idea of what the styling would look like, and you see this pier with, you know, a Ferris wheel, and so you know, looking at this person is probably coastal, that's Seattle, it's recognizable by the Ferris wheel, and it rains there, and so you're getting an idea of what the products might look like and what the styling would look like and what the key inspiration is just by looking at the image. And the same really goes for the second one. This one is a bit of a different layout because I had a picture of Alexa Chung and I did not like her face in that picture. So what I did is I took it off and applied this muscular system underneath it because that is more important to me. And if everything is coming in into one-point perspective, then you definitely need to make sure that the center is not somebody's face. So you're not saying, oh look, I want to design for her. You're saying this is the idea of what you want to look at. So these kind of combined mussels and onions because they were very similar to me, and in a previous video, I talked about the bones and the ligaments and how I like the change and dynamic of the bones diameter and radius, but they're not overwhelming in this photo, they're just there. So, and this picture of Chicago in the background is not to say I want to, you know, work with windows or lines or anything, but it did have this orange color that represented the previous one, and it gave me an opportunity to create a composition that worked well. Again, the entire point of this is the structure of the onion, the muscle, and these roots. So what I did is I made sure that you were definitely able to tell that was more important than the rest of the image. And for the last one, I actually took the FKA Twigs, and I loved her styling, and I love this album that she, you know, cover that she had, so I used it. But then I also thought, okay, how cool would it be if I took that cut off piece of Alexa Chung and apply it? And so that's where it started. And I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew what I wanted to show you throughout these three was that you can actually work less and less with line. You don't have to overwhelm yourself, and do not be afraid of white space, because white space can break up the image and allow the viewer time to sort of adjust to all of the information visually. And so in this one, you know, you're seeing everything that is in the previous ones, except the composition is a bit different. There's very light line, and it started with just the hairs of the fly, and then I just thought it looked cool. And in fact, this was a happy accident. You know, these lines here are from the roots on the previous page, but that's more than okay. You could crop that later or digitize it and change the color. It's whatever you want to do with it. But keeping one side pretty straight allows the eye to go in and around the page. So the hierarchy here is not necessarily in scale, but in proportion to each other. And so I liked this, but I wanted to make sure that my overall concept, yet again, the fly, the hairs were very dominant. And so it's not just that they're all here again, but one is up high and one is centered where the eye looks the most. And so keeping in mind how your eye plays across the page is how you will create a very successful mood board. Lastly, what I think is very important to note about all three of them is there are no pictures of fashion. And there are no pictures of clothes, there are no pictures of shoes, there's no pictures of accessories. The closest thing would be St. Vincent's little turtleneck thing that she has on, but it's black and it's basic and it's not giving me any design details other than a high neckline. So it doesn't mean that that's what I'm gonna use, it doesn't mean that that's what I like, it just is there. But in the other ones, you notice it's the hair, the styling I liked, it's the hair and the makeup I liked. There's not very much going on in terms of fashion. And that's the most important thing I can tell you, is to try to stray away from doing that, because you will start to design replications of what you've already seen. And so what you'll do is you start thinking, oh look, oh that dress is pretty, and then as you're working later, you're just going to draw that dress out in your mind, and it's going to happen subconsciously. So you want to try to prevent yourself from doing just that. So in this one, I didn't go into, you know, laying it out on the page, because that process actually takes quite a long time. But one very good thing to practice when you're making mood boards is to cut these images out of your print off pages and place them on the page, and then take photos of them with your phone or camera, so you can, you know, sift through them and decide, oh, okay, well, I don't like that there, or I like this here, and then you just rearrange the images and keep taking photos, and that's what I did. So as you can see, I don't know if it's visible on the camera or not, but I laid them out prior to even working on the actual page with glue. That's all I have for this video, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. In the next video, we will talk about more hands-on fashion designing, specifically with croquis making and 2D experimentation. And so we'll be able to draw out the croquis, the model. I'll show you guys how to do that, and then I will show you how we're going to take your print-offs that we have over here and taking these and playing with them on croquis. You won't necessarily be drawing fashion, but you will be coming up with the very beginning stages of your overall ideas. So until next time, I will see you guys later, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.